Greetings and salutations. It is I, Mr. Nothing, the museum curator of the weird and the strange and the host who might be a ghost. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual literature that I have found in my travels across heaven, of all places. Trying to make this non-denominational, but there you go. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, and I wanted to talk about a specific book that I found that is about heaven and religion and feminism too, of all things. I am talking about The Wrong Heaven by Amy Bonnaffons. I didn't get a pronunciation of her name. There's not a lot of information about her out there, and that's probably because she only just started getting published within the past 10 years, from what I can find at least. She's a pretty recent author, and I think this is one of the first books that she wrote, or like the first collections that she wrote. She's published a lot of stuff in journals, if this is like one of the first stuff she wrote, it's pretty good. Like it shows she has a lot of talent and a lot of imagination too, because it's interesting. And like, in case you didn't see the cover, it's the Virgin Mary with a pair of jeans, quite unusual. Maybe showing a little bit of a modern take on religion, which is generally what this book is about. Yeah, so I found this at my local library. A good pick, I would say. I didn't really know what to expect when I grabbed it, but I do like what I found because it's quite a wonderful collection. So the specific story that I wanted to talk in this collection is what is it? Let's find it. Little Sister, which is about two parents, is a mom and a dad. Their stillbirth, or their unfortunate tragedy during birth, because the child dies during birth, leads to unfortunate consequences down the line for one of their children. So I'll talk about that, do a little summary, a little analysis, and we will move on from there. So, Little Sister is about an unnamed narrator, a small child, a girl, waiting for her parents at her uncle's house. Her mom has gone into labor, so they're at the hospital waiting for their child. Eventually, enough hours pass, and the child just assumes that the parents are coming back, that they've abandoned her for the new daughter that they're expecting, and so the little girl kind of conjures up an image of the baby in her head, and she kind of manifests it into reality in a bit of magical realism or religious realism. I'm not really sure what the proper term is, but she conjures up the baby, and like after looking at it, she realizes that it's not meant to be. So I think she puts it in her backpack and saves it for a later date. Eventually, the parents do come back. However, they're both. It's just the father, because the father's a bit unhappy because the baby died during childbirth, the narrator doesn't really know what that means, but she kind of has an understanding that means that she won't be seeing her little sister anytime soon. When she gets home, when the family gets home, the narrator takes the baby that's still in the backpack and puts it outside. She digs a little hole and puts the baby there, and it tries to forget about it. And over the course of 2 years, the parents separate, they get divorced, and the father kind of drifts out of the narrator's life. He just explains that some people aren't meant to be fathers, and it's kind of hinted that the accident during birth, like it didn't help the relationship too much. The father drifts away, and so it's just the mother and the little sister, or the sister, who or the mother and the daughter, who are left to sort of like fend for themselves, and the mother gets a job, and the daughter, like, she goes through life always checking in on the little sister, because when they move into another place, she digs up the little sister that was there, and she just she keeps it under her bed in the new house, and like no one ever finds it. And it's not really the weird, like, growing baby, like it's a small child at this point. It just smiles at the narrator, and provides some sense of comfort throughout the course of the story. The narrator's mom starts dating her PE teacher, Buddy Salvage, and around the same time, the narrator, turns into a teenager and starts dating a boy that she describes as like the only guy she's willing to let touch her, showing that she's probably had some difficulties with men in her life. And she does have sex with her boyfriend, but it makes her feel wildly uncomfortable. Like she's not too happy with this relationship. And afterwards, she goes underneath her bed and like hangs out with her, what I'm guessing is an imaginary little sister, who is only smiling about everything. And like the narrator is like, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to cause pain to you, as some sort of coping mechanism. And despite what she says, the little sister is always there, not really willing to react to any of this mean talk that's going on. As she nears her graduation, the boyfriend in the scenario proposes, and because he says he wants to knock her up. And that, combined with the fact that her mom ditched her for 4 days to marry Buddy, is too much for the narrator. So she runs away with the little sister in the car, and she drives to Kansas, where she picks up a job and rents a small apartment. And over the course of the rest of her life, she marries the floor manager of the Target that she's working in, and has children with him. And her life goes downhill, and it's never quite what she wants it to be. And she eventually buries the little sister underneath the floorboards, where nobody really knows about it. And the narrator eventually kind of just forgets about it. But before she dies, the narrator, she leaves a note underneath the floorboards, or she imagines leaving a note. It's unclear if she actually did that. But she imagines her grandchildren finding the note after her death and looking under the floorboards and being like, oh, this is what she carried with her all her life. This is what she sought to protect, and what she's been dealing with. And that's about where the story ends. And not a very happy place. A very, very sad story there. In terms of analysis, there's a lot to unpack here with this story. The first thing that I noticed is the idea that there's disappointment with the men in women's lives throughout this story. The first is Uncle Jim and Rhonda, when the narrator is at their house while the parents are going through childbirth. Rhonda is described as very neurotic, constantly making coasters and whatnot, even for things that don't need coasters. And she seems to be in a very neurotic kind of state, with Uncle Jim providing a little comfort for her. It's kind of implied there. So that's where you see the first instance of a man not really providing emotional support for someone in their life. And then you see it again with the narrator's mom and dad, because the dad just leaves for 2 years, and then leaving her mom to fend for herself, and then leaving out of the daughter's life by saying, I'd rather be an uncle than be a father, to be honest. Some people just aren't meant to be fathers, which is something you shouldn't say to a child, but it's very harsh, and you see the disappointment forming there. And then there's the disappointment between the mom and her new boyfriend, Buddy Salvage, because he wants him to provide for her and him to actually show affection, which he isn't really doing. And then there's the weird relationship between the narrator and her first boyfriend, and then the narrator and the floor manager, who she kind of indicates that she's never really happy with, and she goes through the rest of her life in kind of a funky stupor, where she's not in a place she wants to be. She's feeling very sad, and it's just a lifetime of depression for her. So you see a lot of disappointment with men, and you would think, whoa, well, this story is very negative towards men. How could I say it's feminist? Because earlier I said it was kind of like feminist, spiritual feminism in kind of a way. And I think the big difference between just being angry at men and like being feminist is that there's a reason why these men are portrayed that way, because they're not providing emotional support, especially when women need it. When the father, or like when the mom lost her child during childbirth, like the father responded by, not being there for the mom and like being on a business trip in Arizona for the past 2 years. So like you can see why that father is portrayed in a negative light. So I think that like you kind of get that, like this story is kind of subtly indicating that men need to be better and providing examples of like how men fail in slight ways. So I think that's a big theme there, and it's worth talking about. The other thing that I noticed with this story is the idea of the little sister. And for me, there's the question of why does the little sister exist? It's a bit unclear as to why she exists and what it represents throughout the story. I think one good explanation is that this little sister represents a coping mechanism throughout life. Whenever the narrator finds herself in a difficult position, she thinks about the little sister, and that helps her get through whatever it is she's dealing with. Because she can berate the little sister all she wants, but the little sister smiles, even though it's described as a weird smile at times. And so that helps her understand that things could be better, although it's I don't think it's 100% good of an explanation. Although the best evidence for this is the very beginning of the story, because she conjures the idea of this little sister when she imagines her parents abandoning her for this newborn child. So like this little sister could be her way of coping with the fact that she could be abandoned by her parents at any minute. And although the very fact that like she buries this child in the backyard and then doesn't think much about it for 2 years indicates that maybe it's not as much a coping mechanism as I might think. The other explanation is that this little sister could be the narrator's ideal self, like when she feels abandoned by her parents, she conjures up this image of what maybe an idea of a person that wouldn't leave her parents. That her parents wouldn't leave and would accept and would want to continue raising. I think that's a better explanation, or what she could have been without these negative male influences in her life. She could have been happy, and she could have been, a shining beacon rather than someone filled with insomnia and obesity and crippling depression. She even goes so far as to say that, and like at the very end of the story, the narrator says, like, I imagine my grandchildren opening up the floorboards, finding this, and being like, "Oh, this is what she could have been. This is what's been lost." And I think that's a good explanation, probably better than the coping mechanism one. But I do feel that like the idea of the little sister leaves, Amy leaves a lot for the reader to try to guess about, and I think there's a variety of explanations that could fit for what the little sister means for the narrator. The last thing I want to talk about is how this story is, for the lack of a better word, deeply, deeply sad. The word melancholy pops up again. I use that word to describe the story that I read from Dinosaurs and Other Planets by Danielle McLaughlin. Both stories show the narrators and protagonists in places they'd rather not be, and hopeless, and with feelings of hopelessness. But where Danielle McLaughlin, like her stories focused on like narrators, like they had an opportunity for a better life. I think with this story, like the narrator doesn't really have an opportunity for a better life. In many of these stories, it feels like either God doesn't exist or God has forsaken the narrators in some way, especially because these are very religious stories. And like the very first story like involves like these statues of like Jesus and Mary coming to life and trying to give the narrator advice, but it's not very helpful advice, from my point of view at least. So there's a sense that that God is dead, or God just doesn't care, which is a bit sad. There's a part at the beginning of the story that I feel illustrates the sadness that exists in this book. It happens after the dad comes home from the hospital and the mom's not with her, and it's revealed that the baby died during childbirth. But my mom is not at home, and neither is the baby, because there is no baby. There was a baby for a minute, but then it just went out. That's the phrase my father uses. It just went out. At first, I think he means that the baby got up and walked away. It takes me a minute to realize that he means the baby is dead. I feel like that gets at the sadness, and like with the other stories in here, there's a sense of spiritual emptiness, where like there's a void in the narrator's life, and it doesn't seem to be filled by anything, something that could only be filled by religion or connection with others or some sense of spirituality. I think Amy does a really good job of jumping on that kind of theme, and I think it makes the stories really good. Overall, I would say this was a very good short story that I read, and a very good collection of short stories. Like, they were all really good, and then I hit Little Sister, and it just connected with me. Like, I cried a little bit because the story, like, it really hit me pretty hard. Like, you engaging in magical realism, and here comes this story that feels very real, and like there are some kind of magical elements to it, but it's still pretty hard to read at times. Overall, I would say I recommend the story. There are trigger warnings, for various stuff that happens, like, pregnancy and whatnot. So just, be sure to be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, if you can find it, go ahead and read it. If you want a more happier flavor, I would check out the story Horse, which is about a narrator who works with a friend, and that friend is it takes in vitro fertilization injections, while the narrator takes injections to become a horse, which sounds ridiculous, and the story is very ridiculous, and I enjoyed it. Make sure you go find the collection if you can. It's a great one. Otherwise, feel free to comment below if you have something to say about the story. I would always love to have a discussion, especially about such an interesting collection of short stories. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people may find out about this interesting book that definitely has a lot of thinkers in terms of reads. Otherwise, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and Jesus-y travels. Farewell.